Shattered vows. The warm glow of candlelight flickered against the grand walls of the historic estate as music drifted through the air. Laughter and champagne bubbles swirled around Olivia and Ethan, their hands entwined as they basked in the afterglow of their vows. It was supposed to be the happiest day of their lives. But then a voice cut through the revelry. "Stop this wedding." The room fell silent. At the entrance stood an older man, his face pale, his hands trembling. Olivia's Father Harold Sinclair. His gaze was locked on Ethan's mother, Margaret Calloway, who had been smiling moments ago but now looked as if she had seen a ghost. Margaret's voice came out in a whisper, barely audible. "Harold." Ethan stiffened. "Mom?" Margaret turned. To him, her expression torn between anguish and guilt. "I never told you because I never thought this moment would come. But Harold and I... we..." She swallowed hard. "We had a child I was forced to give up before I ever met your father." A wave of shock rippled through the guests, murmurs rising in disbelief. Olivia clutched Ethan's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice shaky. Margaret's lips parted, but it was Harold who answered, his voice grave. "Olivia, Ethan, you might be brother and sister." The world tilted. The joy of the day collapsed under the weight of those words. Gasps echoed. Olivia felt her knees weaken. Ethan's grip on her hand tightened before he let go, stepping back as if struck. "No." Ethan shook his head. "That's not possible." "Mom, tell me he's lying." Margaret's eyes glistened with tears. I don't know for sure. I was young. I never knew what happened to the baby after they took him from me." Olivia felt her breath catch in her throat. What if it's true?" The love they had built, the promises they had made, everything seemed to hang in the balance. The crowd whispered around them, but Olivia only saw Ethan, his face, pale and conflicted, mirroring her own turmoil. And then Harold spoke again. "There is one way to know for certain. A DNA test, a truth that could either destroy them or set them free." The wedding was no longer about love. It was about uncovering a secret that had the power to tear them apart forever. Revenge for betrayal. The final reckoning. Chapter 31. The Ghost of Claire. The city felt different now. Quieter, heavier, like it was holding its breath, waiting. Every shadow stretched too long, every whisper in the dark carried her name. Claire. She had vanished after their last battle. The world thought she was dead, but he knew better. A woman like Claire didn't disappear without a plan. And if she was still out there, she was planning to strike again. Ethan Cross had rebuilt his life from the ashes of her betrayal. He had taken her down, exposed her crimes, shattered her power, and left her with nothing. Yet somehow she had crawled back into the shadows, waiting for the right moment to remind him that she was never truly gone. Now, he had something to lose again. His business was thriving, his influence had grown, and for the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace. But peace was a lie. The first warning came in the form of a note left on the seat of his car. No cameras had picked up how it got there, no witnesses saw who left it. Just 6 words, handwritten in familiar, elegant script. "Did you miss me, darling?" See Ethan's fingers curled around the paper, his mind calculating every possible scenario. She was watching, waiting, testing him. The second warning came 2 nights later. His lawyer, Daniel Carter, who had helped destroy Claire's empire, was found dead in his apartment. No forced entry, no obvious signs of struggle. Just a single red rose left on his chest. A message meant only for Ethan. She wasn't just back. She was hunting. Chapter 32. Setting the trap, Ethan had spent years learning how Claire operated. She was a master of manipulation, a woman who thrived on psychological warfare. If she wanted him to feel vulnerable, exposed, she would come at him from all sides, and she would start with the people closest to him. He reinforced his security, put his most trusted men on high alert, and set out to track her down before she could strike again. But Claire had become a ghost. No credit card trails, no digital footprint, nothing. It was as if she had never existed. But he knew her weakness. Claire was a control freak. She couldn't resist watching the chaos she created, so he fed her a lie. Through carefully placed leaks, Ethan made it seem as if he was leaving town for a few weeks, taking a quiet retreat to an isolated estate in the countryside. He let his security details slip, let his schedule become predictable. And then, he waited. Chapter 33. The last game. The estate was a perfect stage for the final act. A secluded mansion, miles from the city, surrounded by dense woods that swallowed all sound. Ethan sat in the dimly lit study, a glass of whiskey in hand, staring at the fireplace. He wasn't really drinking. He was listening. Then a soft creak, a whisper of movement near the window. He didn't turn, didn't react, but his pulse quickened. "Hello, Ethan," Claire's voice finally came, smooth and deadly. He exhaled slowly. "Took you long enough." She stepped into the room, bathed in the flickering firelight. She looked different, thinner, sharper, like a blade honed to perfection. But her eyes, they were the same. Cold, calculating. "You've been waiting for me?" she said. He swirled the whiskey in his glass. "Of course. You always had a flair for dramatic returns." Claire smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "You took everything from me, Ethan. My freedom, my power, my life. Did you really think I'd let you win?" He met her gaze, unwavering. "I didn't think. I knew." She laughed softly, circling him like a predator. "Then why do I feel like I'm the one in control? Because you still think you're untouchable." Claire moved closer, but before she could react, the room flooded with light. Armed men stormed in from hidden entrances, weapons raised, cutting off every escape route. Claire froze. Ethan stood, adjusting his cuffs. "Checkmate!" She looked around, calculating. "You set me up." "I always do." For the first time, her mask cracked, fury flashing across her face, but Ethan wasn't done. "You've lost, Claire. This time there's no escape, no deal, no second chance." She exhaled, her shoulders relaxing as she smiled again, but this time it was something else, something darker. "You think this is the end?" she whispered. "You have no idea what you've started." And then, before anyone could stop her, she reached into her pocket. A single click. A detonator. The room exploded. Chapter 34. Aftermath. Ethan woke up to the scent of burning wood and blood. The explosion had taken out half the estate. His men were dead or wounded. Claire was gone. Again. He sat up, pain searing through his ribs. The war wasn't over. Not yet. Claire had escaped, but now she had nothing left to lose, and that made her more dangerous than ever. The final hunt had begun. Revenge for betrayal. The final hunt. Chapter 35. Smoke and ashes. The pain in Ethan's ribs was nothing compared to the rage burning inside him. He staggered to his feet, coughing through the thick smoke that still clung to the wreckage of the estate. His men, what was left of them, were pulling survivors from the rubble. Some groaned in pain, others lay still, their lives snuffed out in Claire's desperate act of defiance. She had done it again, slipped through his fingers, but not for long. Ethan wiped the blood from his temple, ignoring the sting as he turned to his right-hand man, Lucas Ward. Lucas had barely survived the blast, his face smeared with dirt and sweat. He clutched his shoulder, wincing. "She's alive," Ethan muttered. "And she won't stop until one of us is dead." Lucas let out a dry laugh. "So what's the play?" Ethan's jaw clenched. He had been too cautious before, too patient. Claire had proven time and time again that she was beyond redemption, beyond reason. There would be no prison bars, no trials, no negotiations. This time, he was going to end it, for good. Chapter 36. The Chase. Begins Claire was wounded. He had seen the blood on the floor before the explosion. She had escaped, but she wasn't unscathed. Ethan used every resource he had left to track her. Private networks, underground informants, corrupt officials who owed him favors. He knew Claire, knew how she thought. She wasn't just running. She was planning, and then a lead. A surveillance camera in a private airstrip outside the city caught a blurry image of her boarding a plane. Destination: Mexico City. Ethan didn't hesitate. He boarded his jet within the hour, Lucas at his side. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about finishing what he started. Chapter 37. A deadly reunion. Mexico City pulsed with life. Chaotic, unpredictable. It was the perfect place for Claire to disappear. But Ethan had learned from his mistakes. This time, he wasn't walking into her trap. He was setting one of his own. With the help of an old contact, he tracked Claire to a luxurious penthouse overlooking the city. She had money stashed away, enough to rebuild, to start again. But he wasn't here to let that happen. Under the cover of darkness, Ethan infiltrated the building. Silenced weapons, suppressed footsteps, a plan executed with brutal precision. And then he found her. She was waiting, sitting by the floor-to-ceiling window, dressed in black, a half-empty glass of wine in her hand. She didn't flinch when he stepped into the room, gun raised. Instead, she smiled. "Took you long enough," she murmured. Ethan didn't lower the weapon. "You're out of options, Claire," she sighed, swirling the wine in her glass. "Am I?" "You blew up the estate," he said coldly. "Killed my men. You ran. You lost." Claire leaned back, crossing one leg over the other. "And yet, here we are again." Ethan tightened his grip on the gun. "No more games. No more escapes. This ends tonight." For the first time, something flickered in Claire's eyes. Something raw, something close to regret. But then, just as quickly, it was gone. "You should have killed me when you had the chance," she whispered. She moved fast, too fast. A knife flashed in the dim light as she lunged. Ethan barely sidestepped in time, grabbing her wrist and twisting it violently. The blade clattered to the ground. She fought like an animal, desperate and lethal. They crashed into furniture, shattered glass raining around them, and then Ethan had her pinned, his gun pressed against her ribs. Claire panted, her lips split, eyes wild. "Do it," she whispered. For a moment he hesitated, not because he forgave her, not because he still saw something human in her, but because killing her meant it was truly over. And then, Claire smirked, a taunt, a challenge. Ethan pulled the trigger, a single shot. Claire gasped, her body tensing, then relaxing. A crimson bloom spread across her dress as she staggered back, hitting the glass behind her. Her legs gave out. She crumpled to the floor, eyes locked on his. And then, for the first time, Claire Cross looked truly afraid. "You finally did it," she whispered. A weak, bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Guess you win." Ethan exhaled, his hands steady, his heart not. Claire shuddered once, then stilled. Silence filled the room. Chapter 38. Aftermath. Ethan stood over her body for a long time. Then he turned and walked away. No regrets, no second thoughts. The war was over. And for the first time in years, he was free. But as he stepped into the night, leaving Claire behind, he couldn't shake the feeling that some ghosts never truly stayed buried, and maybe, just maybe, some wounds never really healed. The end. Revenge for betrayal. The Legal Trap, Chapter 11. The lawyer's game Ethan Cross had spent sleepless nights replaying the moments leading up to Claire's betrayal, the stolen glances, the whispered phone calls, the unexplained absences. Now he was done wondering. He needed proof. Cold, undeniable proof. That's why he was here. The dimly lit law office smelled of old books and fresh coffee. It wasn't flashy, but it had an air of quiet ruthlessness. The man across from Ethan, Alexander Graves, was known for tearing people apart in the courtroom. He had built his career exposing frauds, cheating spouses, and corporate thieves. Ethan needed someone like him. Graves leaned back in his chair, adjusting his silver-rimmed glasses. "You're certain she's been unfaithful?" Ethan exhaled slowly. "I need to be. And I need leverage." Graves steepled his fingers. "Infidelity is messy. Divorce law even messier. But if your wife has been unfaithful, we don't just need proof. We need a narrative. Something that makes her the villain before she turns it around on you." Ethan's jaw tightened. "She won't just try to defend herself. She'll attack. She's manipulative and she's smart. If she senses I'm coming after her, she'll try to twist this around." Graves smiled faintly. "Good. I like a challenge." He slid a contract across the desk. "I'll find you the truth, but once I do, you have to be prepared to use it." Ethan signed without hesitation. The hunt had begun. Chapter 12. Secrets in the Shadows' Graves wasted no time. Within days, his investigators uncovered traces of Claire's hidden life. Encrypted messages, a secret bank account, and most damning of all, hotel reservations under a fake name. Ethan clenched his fists as he scanned the documents Graves had compiled. Every line confirmed what he already suspected. Claire had planned this carefully, but one name stood out. David Mercer, a powerful investor, a married man, and Ethan's former business rival. Graves smirked as he poured 2 glasses of whiskey. "Looks like your wife didn't just cheat on you, Cross. She sold you out." Ethan took the glass, but didn't drink. His stomach churned as he stared at Mercer's name. "She's not just leaving me. She's trying to destroy me." That's where "We turn the tables," Graves said. "We don't just prove she cheated. We prove why. Money, power, greed. We control the story before she does." Ethan leaned forward, his mind already calculating his next move. "I want everything. Every text, every call, every dollar she's moved. I want to know exactly how deep this betrayal goes." Graves chuckled. "Then you hired the right lawyer." Chapter 13. The first strike, Claire had no idea she was being watched. Graves's team followed her meticulously, gathering every detail. She was careful, but not careful enough. A hidden camera in a private hotel suite caught everything. The stolen kisses, the whispered conversations, the unmistakable proof of her betrayal, and then the real jackpot, a recording. Claire's voice, crystal clear. Ethan won't see it coming. Once Mercer pulls the trigger on the takeover, he'll be left with nothing. Ethan played the audio over and over, his fingers tightening around his phone. It wasn't just an affair, it was an ambush. His own wife had conspired to take him down. Graves raised his glass in a silent toast. "Now, Mr. Cross, how do you want to ruin her?" Ethan's lips curled into a cold smile. "I want her to lose everything. The real war was about to begin, to be continued. Revenge for betrayal." The Deepening Investigation, Chapter 14. Pulling the threads, Ethan Cross had always prided himself on being 2 steps ahead. In business, in negotiations, he anticipated every move. But he had never expected betrayal from the one person he thought he could trust. Now, as he stared at the evidence his lawyer, Alexander Graves, had compiled, he realized that Claire hadn't just betrayed him. She had planned his downfall with cold, calculated precision. The affair with David Mercer was bad enough, but the recording, Ethan won't see it coming. Once Mercer pulls the trigger on the takeover, he'll be left with nothing. That changed everything. This wasn't just infidelity. This was war. Graves set down his whiskey glass, his sharp eyes gleaming. We have enough to destroy her in court. Divorce proceedings, financial fraud, public humiliation, you name it. The question is, how far do you want to take this? Ethan clenched his jaw. I want every lie exposed, every secret dragged into the light. She doesn't just walk away from this, Graves smirked. Then we tighten the noose. Chapter 15. The hidden accounts. While Graves worked on the legal assault, Ethan hired his own investigator, Damian Holt, an ex-black ops specialist turned private fixer. If Claire had secrets, Holt would find them, and it didn't take long. She's been funneling money into offshore accounts, Holt said, tossing a file onto Ethan's desk. Started small, payments disguised as business expenses. But over the past year, she's siphoned millions, money that should have stayed in your company. Ethan's grip tightened around the file. She wasn't just leaving him. She was trying to leave him bankrupt. Holt continued. And Mercer? He's been feeding her inside information. They're planning a corporate takeover using your assets as leverage. Ethan exhaled slowly, controlling the rage boiling inside him. Does Claire know we're on to her? Not yet, Holt said. But Mercer's getting nervous. He's moving assets around, covering tracks. They know something's coming. Ethan's mind raced. He needed to strike before they did. Let them think they're winning, he said. And when they make their move, we'll crush them. Chapter 16. A dangerous gamble. Ethan needed leverage. More than just evidence. He needed something that would make Claire and Mercer desperate. Graves came through again. We found something interesting, he said, sliding over another document. Claire didn't just commit financial fraud. She forged your signature on business agreements. That's felony territory. Ethan's stomach twisted. Claire had always been cunning, but this was reckless. If we take this to the authorities now, Graves said, she could be facing prison. Ethan leaned back, considering. He had wanted to ruin Claire, to strip her of everything she valued. But this was real leverage. He could use it, make her sweat, force her into a position where she had to betray Mercer to save herself, or he could let the law handle it. But where was the satisfaction in that? His phone buzzed. A text. Unknown. Number. Ethan, we need to talk. It's about Claire. He frowned, typing back. Who is this? Seconds later, a reply. Someone who knows what she's really planning. To be continued. Revenge for betrayal. The truth unfolds. Chapter 17. A mysterious informant. Ethan's pulse quickened as he stared at the cryptic text. Someone out there knew more about Claire's betrayal, more than even Graves or Holt had uncovered. And that meant one thing. She was hiding something bigger. He sent a reply. Meet me. Tonight. Midnight. Westwood Park. A few agonizing moments passed before the reply came. No. Too dangerous. I'll send you an address. Come alone. Ethan narrowed his eyes. He didn't like walking into unknown situations unprepared. But he needed answers. A second text came through. A location downtown, an abandoned warehouse, of course. He slipped his gun into his holster, grabbed his coat, and left without a word. Chapter 8 on Shadows and Secrets. The warehouse smelled of damp concrete and rusted metal. A single light flickered above, casting eerie shadows across the empty space. Ethan stepped inside, his eyes scanning every corner. Then, a voice. "You came alone." A woman emerged from the darkness. Petite, with sharp green eyes and dark auburn, hair tied into a loose ponytail. She looked familiar, but Ethan couldn't quite place her. "Who are you?" he asked. The woman hesitated before answering. "Madeline Ross. I used to work for Mercer." Ethan's jaw clenched. "And why should I trust you?" Madeline exhaled. "Because Mercer and Claire played me just like they played you. I was Mercer's assistant, his fixer. I handled all his dirty work. But when I found out what they were really planning, I became a loose end." She pushed up her sleeve, revealing bruises on her wrist. "They tried to silence me." Ethan's fists tightened. "And what exactly were they planning?" Madeline took a shaky breath. "Your ruin was just the beginning. Claire wasn't just going to take your money, she was setting you up for a criminal investigation. Mercer had a team fabricating evidence to make it look like you embezzled from your own company. Once they buried you in lawsuits and fraud charges, they'd take everything. Your business, your reputation, your life." Ethan felt a chill settle over him. He had expected betrayal, but this? They wanted him destroyed beyond repair. Madeline reached into her bag and pulled out a USB drive. "I saved as much evidence as I could before I ran. Emails, financial records, voice recordings, everything that proves Claire and Mercer were behind this." Ethan took the drive. His mind was already spinning with the possibilities. With this, he could end them both. Chapter 19. A trap is set. The next morning, Ethan met with Graves and Holt. They combed through the data Madeline had provided, uncovering layers of deception. "She really covered all her bases," Graves muttered, scanning the documents. "Had you convicted in the court of public opinion before the ink was even dry on the divorce papers." "But now," Ethan said, his voice cold, "we turn this against her." Holt smirked. "What's the plan?" Ethan's eyes burned with vengeance. "We let them think they've won. Claire and Mercer are expecting me to go down in flames. Instead, we push back, hard." He pointed to the documents. "We leak just enough to make Mercer panic. Let him think Claire's been careless, that she's left a trail leading back to him. He's a coward. He'll try to save himself first." Graves nodded. "And once he turns on Claire, she'll have nowhere to run," Ethan finished. Chapter 20. The first domino falls Ethan had Mercer followed. The man was getting nervous, taking extra security measures, making rushed phone calls. Then, one night, Mercer boarded a private jet. Destination: Switzerland. "He's running," Holt reported. "Looks like he's trying to move assets offshore before this blows up." Ethan smirked. "Good. That means he's desperate." He made a call. "Graves, it's time. Leak the files." Hours later, the internet exploded. Anonymous sources had leaked bank records, showing Mercer's illicit transfers. Headlines screamed accusations of financial fraud, insider trading, corporate espionage, and at the heart of it, David Mercer and Claire Cross. Chapter 21. Claire's fall. Begins. Claire stormed into Mercer's office the next morning, her face twisted in rage. "You idiot!" she hissed, slamming the newspaper onto his desk. "We were supposed to control the narrative." Mercer ran a hand through his graying hair, his face pale. "This wasn't me. Someone leaked our accounts. Someone with inside information." Claire's stomach twisted. "Ethan." Mercer's jaw tightened. "He's setting us up. He's not going down quietly." Claire's mind raced. Ethan was always smart, always calculating. But she had underestimated how far he would go for revenge, and now he had the upper hand. "Fix it," she snapped, "before we lose everything." Mercer hesitated. "There might be a way, but it means throwing someone under the bus." Claire narrowed her eyes. "Who?" Mercer exhaled. "You." Claire froze. Then, In a low, dangerous voice, she said, "You wouldn't dare." Mercer swallowed hard. Revenge for betrayal. The War Begins, Chapter 22. Claire strikes back. Claire Cross had always been a survivor. No matter how dire the situation, she found a way to turn the odds in her favor. But this was worse than she had ever imagined. Mercer was cutting her loose. The man who had promised her power, who had plotted with her to ruin Ethan, was now scrambling to save himself. And Ethan was the one pulling the strings. She wouldn't let it happen. She still had leverage. Secrets Mercer thought she'd never. Use evidence of his own crimes far worse than anything they'd pinned on Ethan. If she went down, she'd make sure Mercer burned with her. And Ethan, she'd destroy him. Chapter 23. A desperate gamble, Ethan sat in his office, watching the storm unfold exactly as planned. The leaked documents had turned Mercer into a walking scandal. Investors were panicking, the SEC was circling, and whispers of a federal investigation had started. But more importantly, Mercer and Claire were turning on each other. Holt's latest report confirmed it. "They had a meeting last night," Holt said. "It didn't go well. Mercer's pulling his lawyers, his money, his protection. Claire's on her own." Ethan exhaled slowly, satisfaction creeping in. That means she's dangerous. A cornered animal. Graves, sipping his coffee, nodded. She's got nothing left to lose. If she makes a move, it'll be reckless. And reckless means mistakes. Ethan smirked. Let's give her a reason to make one. Chapter 24. A fatal mistake. Claire had one last card to play. She still had access to some of Ethan's financials, enough to forge a few well-placed transactions. With the right connections, she could frame him for corporate fraud before the authorities got to her. If she was going down, she'd take him with her. She sent the orders through a hidden proxy, covering her tracks like she always had. Then she waited. But something felt wrong. Too easy. Too expected. Her phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number. "You just made your last mistake." Claire's blood ran cold. Then her office door burst open. 2 federal agents stepped inside. "Claire Cross, you're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice." Cold metal closed around her wrists. She had walked straight into Ethan's trap. Chapter 25. The final betrayal. Mercer sat in his high-rise office, sipping a scotch, watching the news. Claire Cross, arrested in financial scandal. Possible connection to Mercer Industries. He exhaled, relieved. That was close. Then, his office phone rang. He answered. "Who is this?" Ethan's voice came through, calm and controlled. "It's over, Mercer." Mercer's grip tightened. "You son of a—" "You thought cutting Claire loose would save you?" Ethan continued, amused. "I made sure you both drowned. Expect a visit from the feds." Mercer's stomach twisted. "You don't have proof." "I have everything," Ethan interrupted. "Bank statements, offshore accounts, bribes, and guess who's going to testify against you to cut a deal?" Silence. Then, Mercer understood. Claire, Ethan had played them both, and now there was no escape. Chapter 26. Victory. Ethan watched the news unfold. Mercer indicted. Claire facing trial. Their empire collapsing. It was over. Graves sat across from him, a satisfied look on his face. "You did it." Ethan exhaled. "Not yet." Graves frowned. "What do you mean?" Ethan's gaze was cold. Claire isn't the type to sit in a cell quietly. She's still dangerous. I need to make sure she never gets back up. Graves studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I'll make some calls." Ethan stood, walking to the window. The war wasn't over. Not until Claire Cross was completely destroyed, and he would make sure of it. To be continued. Revenge for betrayal. The final descent. Chapter 27. Claire's Last Play. Claire Cross sat in an interrogation room, her hands cuffed to the table, her lawyer whispering urgently beside her. The air was thick with tension, but she refused to break. She had been betrayed. By Ethan, by Mercer, by everyone. But she wasn't done yet. Across from her, a federal agent slid a folder toward her. "We have enough to put you away for 20 years, he said. "But there's a way out." Claire didn't flinch. "You want Mercer," the agent smirked. "Give us everything on him and we can negotiate a reduced sentence." Claire tilted her head. "And Ethan?" The agent hesitated. "Ethan Cross isn't our target. He's clean." Claire's nails dug into her palm. "He set me up too perfectly, but she wasn't going down alone." She leaned in, a slow smile curling on her lips. "Fine, I'll give you Mercer." Her lawyer stiffened. "Claire," she ignored him. If Ethan thought this was over, he was wrong. Chapter 28. Mercer's downfall. David Mercer barely had time to pack before the feds kicked in his door. David Mercer, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, insider trading, and obstruction of justice. He barely fought back, his face pale. As he was dragged away, he caught a glimpse of Claire's face on a television screen. Breaking news. Claire Cross to testify against former business partner in exchange for reduced sentence. Mercer let out a strangled laugh. That bitch. She had won, or so she thought, because while Claire had cut a deal, Ethan had one more card to play. Chapter 29. No escape. Ethan watched the trial unfold from his office, Graves sitting beside him. Claire had sold Mercer out in exchange for a lighter sentence. The media painted her as a remorseful victim, someone who had been manipulated into a criminal enterprise. And it was working. The public was starting to sympathize with her. Ethan's jaw tightened. "That won't do," Graves smirked. "Good thing. We still have our ace in the hole." He pulled out a USB drive and slid it across the desk. More evidence, more lies, more crimes, all the things Claire hadn't confessed to. "Leak it," Ethan ordered. Chapter 30. The Final Betrayal. The media turned instantly. New evidence proved Claire had forged documents, blackmailed investors, and laundered money through offshore accounts. Her deal was revoked. She wasn't getting a reduced sentence anymore. She was getting life. The next time Ethan saw her, she was in an orange jumpsuit, her hands cuffed as she was led into the courtroom. She met his gaze, her eyes burning with fury. "You think you've won," she whispered. As she passed him, Ethan smirked. "I know I have." For the first time in months, he felt free. Claire Cross was finished. Epilogue. Moving on months. Later, Ethan stood on the balcony of his new home, the city skyline stretching before him. The war was over. Claire was locked away. Mercer was rotting, in prison. And Ethan? For the first time in a long time, he could finally breathe. But deep down, he knew people like Claire didn't just disappear. And if she ever got out, he'd be ready. The end. Revenge for betrayal. The Ghost of Claire. Cross Chapter 31. A Shadow from the Past. 6 months had passed since Claire Cross was sentenced to life in prison. Ethan had moved on. At least that's what he told himself. His company had survived. His reputation was intact, and Mercer's empire had crumbled into dust. Claire was nothing more than a memory. Until the letter arrived. It was waiting for him on his desk one morning. No return address. No markings, just his name, written in neat, familiar handwriting. Claire's handwriting. Ethan's pulse slowed. His fingers hesitated before tearing the envelope open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "You took everything. From me. But I'm not finished. Enjoy your peace while it lasts. I'll see you soon." See, Ethan exhaled through his nose, forcing himself to stay calm. Claire was in prison. This was impossible. Unless... He picked up his phone and dialed Graves. "Check on Claire," he ordered. Now. Chapter 32, The Impossible. Escape an hour later, Graves called back, his voice tense. "You're not gonna like this." Ethan leaned forward. "Tell me." Graves sighed. "She's not in prison anymore." Ethan went still. "What?" Graves cleared his throat. 2 weeks ago, Claire was transferred to a different facility under special circumstances. Some kind of clerical mix-up, except the transfer never arrived. Somewhere along the way, she vanished. Ethan's grip tightened around his phone. "And you're telling me this now?" "The prison didn't report it," Graves said. "They assumed she was already at the new location. By the time anyone realized she was missing, it was too late." Ethan took a slow, steady breath. She had help. Graves didn't argue. "Looks that way." Ethan clenched his jaw. Claire was out. She was coming for him, and this time, she had nothing left to lose. Chapter 33. The Hunt. Begins. Ethan knew Claire better than anyone. She wouldn't strike immediately. No. She would wait, watching from the shadows, biding her time, and that meant he had a small window to find her first. Graves assembled a team. Holt dug into financial records, trying to track down any hidden accounts Claire might have left behind. Every contact, every former ally, every possible lead was investigated. Then, a breakthrough. One of Mercer's old offshore accounts had moved. Money was being withdrawn in small amounts from different locations. Ethan leaned over the map of transactions. "She's being careful, but she's making a mistake." Graves nodded. "She's alive, and she's nearby." Ethan's eyes burned with cold fury. This wasn't over. It had never been over. And this time, he wouldn't just beat Claire. He would end her, for good, to be continued. Revenge for betrayal. The Final Game. Chapter 34. A ghost in the dark. Ethan couldn't sleep. Claire was out there somewhere, breathing the same air as him, plotting her next move. He could almost feel her watching him, lurking just beyond his reach. Graves was working around the clock, following the money trail. Every offshore account Mercer had once controlled was under scrutiny. Every former ally of Claire's was being tracked. And then, a hit. One of Mercer's old shell companies just activated, Holt reported. Funds were withdrawn from a private bank in Madrid. Ethan's brow furrowed. "Madrid?" "It gets better," Holt continued. "The transaction was flagged because it was linked to someone traveling under an alias, a woman using Claire's mother's maiden name." Ethan's grip on the desk tightened. She was getting sloppy. She wanted him to find her. Chapter 35. The trap is set. Ethan booked a flight the same day. "Are you sure this is smart?" Graves asked as they boarded. "She's not Mercer. She's unpredictable. She'll be expecting you." Ethan nodded. "I'm counting on it." He wasn't coming to hide. He was coming to end this. Madrid was beautiful at night, the streets alive with motion, but Ethan didn't care. He followed the trail, tracing the transaction to a luxury hotel, just outside the city center. And then, he saw her. Claire, sitting alone at a rooftop bar, her dark hair falling over one shoulder, a glass of wine in her hand. She looked untouched by prison, untouched by her crimes, like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't ruined his life, like she wasn't still trying to. Ethan approached slowly. Claire didn't turn around, but her lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "I was wondering when you'd find me," she said, sipping her wine. Ethan sat across from her, eyes cold. "You're not as clever as you think." Claire finally met his gaze, and for the first time in years, she looked dangerous. "Neither are you," she whispered. Chapter 36. The final betrayal Ethan should have known. Should have seen it coming. But by the time he noticed the two men at the other end of the bar watching them too closely, it was already too late. A sharp sting pierced his neck. He reached up, fingers brushing against a tiny needle. His vision blurred. Claire leaned in, brushing a hand against his cheek, her voice mockingly soft. "Did you really think I'd let you win?" The last thing Ethan saw before the darkness swallowed him was Claire's victorious smile. Chapter 37. Checkmate Ethan woke up somewhere dark, cold concrete beneath him. His wrists bound, the faint hum of machinery. He tried to move. Pain shot through his limbs. Then, Claire's voice. "You should have let me rot in prison, Ethan." A light flickered on, revealing her standing over him, arms crossed, calm, in control. Ethan clenched his jaw. "If you wanted me dead, I wouldn't be here." Claire smirked. "You're right. I don't want you dead. I want you to suffer." Ethan's pulse slowed. "What do you want?" Claire crouched beside him, her expression shifting to something darker. "I want you to lose everything, the way I did." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a phone. Ethan's phone. She tapped the screen, scrolling through something. And then she held it up for him to see. The screen showed a transfer in progress, millions, his accounts, his company, his entire fortune. Claire met his gaze and whispered, "Checkmate. To be continued." Revenge for Betrayal. The Web Unravels, Chapter 38. The discovery Ethan sat in his dimly lit office, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. It was late, but sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford. He had spent days meticulously going through files, cross-checking receipts, and examining every suspicious detail. Claire had been the mastermind behind the elaborate ruse that framed him, but there was someone else in the web, a partner, a trusted ally, someone who had turned against him. David Mercer. Ethan's eyes flicked over to the file that sat untouched on his desk, the one with the name Mercer Industries stamped boldly across the front. He'd been putting off opening it, but he knew that today was the day. Taking a deep breath, he opened the folder. Inside, there were documents, bank statements, emails, and printouts that made his stomach twist. Evidence of shady transactions, falsified reports, and an illicit offshore account. It was clear as day. David Mercer had been in on it all along. But then something else caught his eye, an email thread marked Confidential. The sender was Claire Cross. The recipient, David Mercer. He clicked it open, his heart pounding in his chest. Chapter 39. The Betrayal Revealed. The first email was innocuous enough, talking about mundane business decisions. But as he scrolled further down, the tone of the messages shifted. The emails became more personal, more urgent. Claire. The plan's in motion. Ethan's too trusting. He'll never see us coming. Mercer. Are you sure this is the right time? We don't want to risk it all for nothing. Claire. He's getting too close to the truth. We need to move quickly. The money's already been funneled to the account. Ethan will never know what. Hit him! The last line made Ethan's blood run cold. Mercer. You've got the timing right. Once he's out of the way, we can take everything. We'll finally have control. Ethan slammed the folder shut. He had suspected, but seeing the confirmation in black and white felt like being punched in the gut. David Mercer had been just as much a part of Claire's betrayal as she had. He was complicit. But this wasn't just about Mercer anymore. This was about a conspiracy. Chapter 40. The confrontation, Ethan didn't waste a second. He called Graves. We need to meet. Now, 30. Minutes later, the two of them sat in the back of Ethan's car, headed for Mercer's private estate. Are you sure about this? Graves asked, his voice tight with caution. Confronting him now, without knowing how much he's involved, it could be dangerous. Ethan's jaw tightened. He's the one who orchestrated everything. He's the one who made sure I took the fall for Claire's betrayal. I'm not going to let him get away with it. Graves nodded. All right, let's make sure we have a backup plan. Mercer's no fool. Chapter 41. The showdown Mercer's estate was grand, the kind of place that screamed power and excess. Ethan barely noticed the beauty of the grounds as he stormed through the front doors. Mercer was waiting for him in his study, a glass of whiskey in his hand, a smirk on his face. You have some nerve showing up here, Ethan, Mercer said, his voice calm but dripping with arrogance. I'd have thought you'd be too busy trying to put the pieces of your life back together to bother with me. Ethan's gaze hardened. You and Claire made sure I didn't have a life to put back together. Mercer's smirk faltered just for a moment. You're wrong. You were always too naive to see the bigger picture. You were a useful pawn, nothing more. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. I'm done being your pawn, Mercer. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the printouts of the emails, slamming them down on the desk between them. You and Claire, this whole thing was your plan from the beginning, wasn't it? Mercer's eyes narrowed, but he didn't speak. You betrayed me, Ethan continued, his voice low and seething. And now, I'm going to make sure you pay for it. Chapter 42. The fallout. The legal battle that followed was nothing short of explosive. Ethan's lawyer had used the evidence of Mercer's involvement in the conspiracy to press charges. Mercer tried to fight it, of course. He had connections, resources, a fortune to protect, but the evidence was too damning. Claire's betrayal, her involvement in the embezzlement, the fraudulent transactions, the blackmail, they were all part of a well-orchestrated scheme. The final blow came when Mercer's own financial records were subpoenaed. The truth came to light. Ethan watched from the sidelines as Mercer's empire collapsed, one brick at a time. But it wasn't over yet. There was still Claire, and this time he was going to make sure there was no escape, to be continued. Revenge for betrayal. The final exposé, Chapter 43. Claire's last move, Ethan had seen Mercer's empire fall. The trial was a spectacle, one that ended with Mercer behind bars, a guilty man whose once untouchable reputation was now nothing but dust. But even as his adversaries crumbled, Ethan knew the true battle wasn't over. Claire was still at large, still out there, and her revenge wasn't going to be easy to escape. He'd thought about it for weeks, how to take down Claire once and for all. It wasn't just about her being in prison. Ethan knew she was a mastermind, always 10 steps ahead, and he couldn't afford to make another mistake. It was time to dig deeper than ever before. Chapter 44. The ghost in the machine graves had warned him, but Ethan couldn't stop himself. The search for Claire was consuming him. He dug through every legal file, every communication, every single detail of Claire's dealings. If there was one thing Claire had always been good at, it was covering her tracks. But even the most meticulous criminals left behind traces. That's when he found it. A coded message in one of the files Claire had left behind, buried deep in Mercer's records. At first it seemed like gibberish, numbers, symbols, fragments of sentences, but something about it felt familiar. Ethan spent hours decoding it, working through the night, breaking the cipher one piece at a time. When the message finally revealed itself, it took him a moment to process. It was an address, a location hidden beneath layers of false identities, the place where Claire was hiding. And it wasn't just any address. It was a place tied to someone from his past, a name he hadn't heard in years, someone with deep connections to both Claire and Mercer, Victor McAllister. A name he had thought was long forgotten, buried with the rest of the corruption. Chapter 45. The last betrayal Victor McAllister was not just a name. He was the key to Claire's escape, the man who had helped her orchestrate her most daring move yet. The address led to an old estate, one on the outskirts of the city, away from prying eyes, the kind of place where a ghost could disappear. Ethan arrived before dawn, his nerves taut with anticipation. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He stepped carefully out of the car, the gravel crunching underfoot. The estate loomed in, the distance, its shadows long and forbidding. The world was silent, the only sound his own breath in the cold morning air. He was getting close. Chapter 46. Confrontation. As Ethan approached the main house, he saw it. A figure, standing by the door. Claire. She looked exactly as she had the last time he saw her. Beautiful, dangerous, unrepentant. Her eyes flickered toward him, a brief moment of recognition before her lips curled into a smile. "You finally found me," she said softly. "Took you long enough?" Ethan stepped closer, his heart pounding. "You didn't think I'd give up, did you? You might have beaten me once, but not this time." Claire tilted her head, her eyes cold as ice. "You think you can stop me? You think I'll just give up?" Ethan reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out the envelope containing the full set of documents, the final evidence he had uncovered. The last of Claire's sins. "You're done, Claire. You don't have any more cards to play." Claire's smile faltered, but only for a split second. "You think these will save you? They don't mean anything to me anymore." Ethan's pulse quickened. He had expected this. He had expected her to be defiant. But it didn't matter. "This time they're not for you. They're for everyone else you've destroyed." He threw the envelope onto the ground between them, watching as Claire's eyes darted toward it. The weight of everything she had done, the lies, the manipulation, the destruction of everything he held dear, was now laid bare before her. Chapter 47. A Reckoning. Claire's hands trembled slightly as she reached down to pick up the envelope. She scanned the documents, her face darkening with each passing second. Ethan didn't move. He stood his ground, waiting for her reaction. "Do you think this will change anything?" Claire's voice was suddenly colder, quieter. "You're nothing but a man who got in my way." Ethan shook his head. "You could have been something more, but you chose this. You chose betrayal." For a long moment, Claire said nothing. Her eyes flicked over the documents, her mind working through the gravity of the situation. Finally, she looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "You'll never truly know how far I'd go to get what I want." Ethan stared at her, feeling the years of pain, anger, and betrayal flood back to the surface. "I know exactly how far you'd go, Claire." She stepped closer, her voice a whisper. "Then you know the truth." Ethan didn't respond. He didn't have to, because at that moment he knew everything he needed to know. Claire had been the architect of his ruin, and she would never stop trying to destroy him, but he would never let her win again. Revenge for betrayal. A New Dawn, Chapter 49. The aftermath. The sound of Claire's car being driven away by the officers still echoed in Ethan's mind. For a moment he stood on the front steps of the estate, watching the dust settle as the police vehicles disappeared down the winding road. The air felt still, almost oppressive, like the world had been holding its breath, waiting for this moment. Ethan hadn't realized how long he'd been holding on to the anger, the bitterness. All the years of torment and betrayal had come crashing, down in a single night, and now it was over. The house was quiet, the estate that had once been filled with tension now empty. For the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan could breathe without the constant pressure of Claire's manipulations pressing on his chest. But as he walked back through the front door, the weight of what had come before was still there. Ho could no longer escape it. The scars, the pain, the years lost to Claire's games. Chapter 50. The cost of victory Graves had been right when he said the road to redemption would be long. Ethan had secured his revenge, dismantling Claire's empire, and seeing her taken away to face the consequences of her actions. But as he stood in the quiet of his home, surrounded by the remnants of his life before the betrayal, the reality of what he had lost hit him all over again. It wasn't just his fortune or his reputation, it was his peace. He'd fought so hard to uncover the truth, to destroy Claire's hold over him, but in the process, he'd lost a part of himself. He wasn't sure he could get back. Ethan poured a glass of whiskey and sank into his armchair. His reflection in the window stared back at him, someone who had fought to survive, but now unsure of who he was or what he had become. Was this truly victory? Chapter 51. The unexpected reunion days passed, and Ethan found himself reconnecting with the parts of his life he had abandoned during the storm that had been Claire. But there was still a lingering emptiness inside, a place where the anger and pain used to reside, now replaced by an unsettling silence. It was on one of those quiet evenings that the phone rang, its sound cutting through the stillness of his. "Home! Mr. Caldwell?" It was a voice he hadn't heard in years. Ethan stood up, his heart beating a little faster. "Who is this?" "This is Rachel Parker. We met a long time ago before all of, well, everything." Ethan paused. Rachel. She had been a friend from his past, someone he'd lost touch with during the chaos with Claire and all the years that followed. He hadn't spoken to her since before his world had fallen apart. "I didn't expect to hear from you," Ethan said, trying to mask the surprise in his voice. Rachel laughed softly. "I know. I wasn't sure if I should call, but I heard about what happened with Claire. I wanted to check on you." Ethan's throat tightened. For the first time in a long while, someone was offering him something other than disdain, someone who wasn't interested in his pain, but in him. "I'm fine," he said, his voice uncertain. "I think I'm finally beginning to move forward." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Rachel spoke again, her voice softer now. "Do you think you'll ever truly be able to move on from everything? From her?" Ethan stared out the window, the moonlight filtering in, casting soft shadows across the room. For the first time in a while, the truth hit him like a wave. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I think I'm ready to try." Rachel was silent for a moment, and when she spoke again, there was a warmth to her words. "If you ever need someone to talk to, someone who isn't part of that world, I'm here." Ethan felt a sense of relief, the kind he hadn't felt in years. "I might take you up on that." Chapter 52. New Beginnings. The days that followed were filled with small but significant changes. Ethan didn't rush to fix everything at once. He didn't rush to repair his life or heal the wounds Claire had left behind. Instead, he allowed himself time to breathe. Rachel called again, and their conversations became more frequent. They shared stories, memories of simpler times, and slow laughter that helped Ethan remember what it felt like to connect with someone who wasn't tied to his past. Ethan also began to rebuild his business, but this time with a clearer vision. He wasn't driven by the need for revenge or power. He was building for himself. His success would be his own, not dictated by the past or anyone else's manipulations. Chapter 53. A quiet resolution. Weeks turned into months, and as the seasons changed, so did Ethan. Claire's shadow no longer loomed over him. The anxiety, the constant need to look over his shoulder, it was all slowly fading. He sat in his office one afternoon, watching the city skyline as the sun began to set. He'd once thought this would be the hardest part, facing the emptiness after the storm. But now, with the knowledge that he had survived it,